Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Trevor with Maker Experiment, and today I'm excited to be building my new computer. So currently I do all of my work on this laptop. So this laptop is a Dell E6420. I've had this laptop for about 5 or 6 years, and it actually wasn't new when I bought it. I bought it used off of eBay. It's a CAD machine from a company. I've mostly been using it for laser work and design, but with the new YouTube videos I've been putting out, I've been starting to use it for video editing, and it does not like it whatsoever. Every time I open the program, it gives me error messages about how the graphics card cannot keep up with what I'm trying to do, and because of that, I've decided to go ahead and invest in a new computer setup. I looked into building my own versus buying one off the shelf and what the specs would look like versus the price, and ultimately decided to go ahead and build my own. I am not a professional by any means. I've only built one computer ever, and that was only about a month ago, and that was for work. But I did a lot of research on this. I consulted quite a few people that are computer builders pretty much for a living, and came up with the components that I thought would work best for what I am going to do. First off, I'm going to be using this computer for graphic design, video editing, and 3D modeling. The programs that I actually use are the Adobe Creative Cloud, Fusion 360 for 3D modeling, Premiere Pro for video editing, and mostly Illustrator for design. And I picked all of the components based off of that premise. Now, it's not going to be the ultimate gaming computer or anything like that. It'll run games, but it's not meant for gaming. For this computer, I set the budget at $2,000 for everything, which was the computer, all of the components, the keyboard, the mouse, the monitor, everything. Now, I went a little bit over that, but the computer itself was about $1,850. So that's all the computer components with the mouse and the keyboard. The monitor ended up setting it over just a little bit because of the monitor that I chose. But overall, the computer itself was under $2,000, which I think is great considering the components that I chose. So what I'm going to do is show you the components that I picked while building this computer and talk about why I chose them and how I did the research. So let's get started. First, I do want to say that a large help to this was using the website called cgdirector.com. I used this website to kind of spec out the computer components itself. It did help me figure out the components that I needed, as well as the type of components I wanted to look for. I used this as a baseline to pick everything from there, and then just talked to other computer builders and verified what I chose. But the first thing that I'm going to get out is the case, because that's what everything is going to go in. So going to go ahead and unpack that and show you what I have. The case that I chose for this is the NZXT H510. This was actually on sale for, I think, $69.99 for Black Friday. I went ahead and picked this one up mainly because it has the storage capability that I wanted. The cable management is supposed to be good. It had good ratings overall on Newegg and Amazon, and it seems to be a pretty popular case with builders right now. The case mainly just houses all of the components, so it doesn't have to be something crazy expensive or something extremely elaborate, which is why I went ahead and chose kind of a budget one so that I could put more money into the components that make a difference, such as the graphics card or the processor. Next, I want to talk about the motherboard and the processor that I chose. And the reason that I want to talk about them together is because they kind of go hand in hand. You have to make sure that the motherboard will work with the processor that you're going to be using. In this case, I chose the Asus TUF X570 Plus Wi-Fi motherboard. And the reason that I chose this one is it was recommended by a few other people. And another important note on all of these components is I actually waited until Black Friday week to buy most of them. So for some of them, the price that I paid is quite cheaper than the price that they're probably going to be at the time when this video comes out. This is one of those components. So this is normally $199.99. I believe I paid $179.99. So I saved about 20 bucks, which helped go towards other components as well. You can think of the motherboard as kind of the control panel. So this is where all of the components are going to plug into in some fashion in order to operate the actual computer. So the processor is going to plug into this, the RAM is going to plug into this, CPU power cables, pretty much everything is going to plug into the motherboard in some fashion. To go with that motherboard, I chose the AMD Ryzen 9 3900X processor. So at the time of this video, this is one of the best processors at the price range that I wanted to be in. This processor was $499.99, which I believe is its normal retail price. All through the month of October and November, people were trying to sell them for $580 all the way up to $600 and something dollars just because they were out of stock quite often. So during Black Friday, it came back in stock at the retail price, so I went ahead and bought it before it would sell out again. This component is basically the brain of the computer. This is what is going to control everything. I've always had Intel in the past, but on this one, the specs for multi-core processing for video editing were quite a bit higher than the equivalent i9 processor from Intel. But it's like any other electronic. Intel will come out with one that beats AMD and then vice versa, and it's just going to be an ongoing battle. This one also comes with a CPU cooling fan already in the box, so I didn't buy an extra one. It may not be the quietest, but for right now, I'm just trying to build this computer on a strict budget. So I'm going to stick with the stock one. It does have an LED ring for what that's worth if you care about that. But now that you see the motherboard and the processor that I've picked, I'm going to go ahead and install them into the case and just show you what that looks like. You have to be careful with these components because if you shock them with static electricity, it could fry them and cause problems. So you can wear some gloves to help with this and also discharge all of your static electricity so you don't touch anything and shock it. Just keep that in mind as you go through this. Again, I'm not a professional computer builder. This is only the second time I'm ever doing it. It's going to take me some time, so bear with me, and as soon as we get these installed, I'll talk about the next component. So I got the panel off the case, and here, this is the top side, this is the bottom. The motherboard is actually going to go in this spot right here. If you look closely, let me try to zoom in here. So if you look closely, there are standoffs that the motherboard is going to sit on and screw down to. Then there's a slot in the top for the cords to come through. Some people actually put the power source in first, run all the cables, and then plug everything in. I'm going to be kind of working in tandem with things and just trying to build it how I feel is the easiest for me. So first up, I'm going to put the motherboard in. When you open up the box to the motherboard, you're going to see something like this. You're going to have the motherboard itself inside of a bag, a static bag. You're going to have the back I/O panel. So this actually goes into the case, and this is what's going to tell you on the back what is a USB, what is the headphone jack, all of that stuff. So this panel is specific to the motherboard itself. And if you ever look at the back of a desktop computer, you'll see that there's this type of panel, and this is where it comes from. I didn't know that until I built my first computer. It also comes with extra standoffs, and it comes with cables. So again, dependent upon your motherboard, the components might be different. This is just what comes in mine. I'm also going to be wearing gloves while doing this just because I don't want to accidentally shock the motherboard. So with that, let's go ahead and put it into place. I do want to point out that all the hardware to install the motherboard actually comes with the case. For the NZXT case, it actually came in this box that was located down where the power supply would go. It comes with all of these screws and everything that need to go in the case. The last computer build didn't have this, but this one actually comes with everything labeled. It's kind of hard to read, but all the screws are labeled. So hopefully this will be pretty easy. And hopefully the manual will be pretty easy to follow. So the manual is also with the case. It'll tell you how to install or what screws to use. So I'm going to go ahead and do that part, and then I'll show you what that looks like. So the first part about installing the motherboard is installing this panel. So this panel is going to go in this slot in the back of your computer. Make sure that the orientation is correct. So make sure all the wording is facing up. And then you're going to slide it into place. Now this part is a flimsy piece of metal, so it's It can't hold up to a lot of pressure. Just be careful when you're putting it in. So from the back side, this is what it's going to look like. Now to unpackage the motherboard, just make sure you discharge all your static electricity. So the motherboard is going to have all those connections which line up with that panel that we just put in. So I'm going to slide it into there and then onto the standoffs. One thing that I want to point out with the case and the motherboard is that you have to pick a case and motherboard that will fit together. So this case will fit a micro ATX motherboard, a full ATX motherboard, but it will not fit an eATX motherboard. So depending on the motherboard that you choose, your case has to fit it. So just make sure when you're sizing it that if you want an ATX motherboard, which is kind of like the middle one, but if you want that size, you have to make sure that your case supports it. So just be careful, that way you don't buy the wrong size case. Once the motherboard is in place, you can go ahead and start putting in all of the screws. So in my case, these are sized 632 by 5 millimeters. That's not going to be the same for every case. And just tighten them to where they're snug. Don't over tighten or you might crack the motherboard itself. And this is a pretty difficult part just because the screws are so small and my hands are not the smallest. Before I install the processor, I'm actually going to put in the power supply to the computer. For this computer, I chose the Seasonic Platinum 750 watt power supply. You have to rate your power supply based on the components that you are putting in the computer. So for things like the GPU or the graphics card, the CPU and everything else, it's going to give you a power rating of what it is, or how much it consumes, and how much power the power supply should have. In my case, the graphics card and everything said I needed 650. I went ahead and went one level up to the 750. Again, this component was actually on sale. I think I paid $119.99 maybe at the time that I'm making this video. I think it retails for maybe $139, $149. So it's always good to look for deals and try to save some money so that you can either just save money in general or put more money into other components. So inside of here, you're going to see a bunch of cables, and then the actual power supply itself is right there. This is all going into the case and will feed power to all of your components. Most of these will plug into the motherboard, the graphics card, and the other components in the computer. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in, plug it into the motherboard, and then I'm going to go ahead and put the processor into the computer. One thing that I want to point out on this power supply is that it is a fully modular power supply. It comes with all of the cables that fit neatly into these connectors. If it's not fully modular or at least semi-modular, I believe you have to hardwire a lot of things into the power supply. So for ease of use, go with a full modular power supply. Before you put the power supply into the case and hook everything up, you're going to want to test it. So it actually comes with a tester block that you need to plug it into. What you're going to do, because this was not apparent to me the first time. So this is the power supply. You're going to put the power cable here, plug it into an outlet. In this case, mine has a hybrid mode, so I'm going to push this button in to turn it off. Otherwise, the fan's not going to spin. The next thing you want to do is grab the motherboard cable. So this one has, I think it's 24 pins on this connection, 18 on this one, and 10 on that one. At the bottom of here, you'll see a label that says MB for motherboard. You're going to plug in the 18 slot one there, the 10 there. Then you're going to plug this side into the tester block. So it'll look like this. Then you'll go to an outlet, plug it in, turn the turn the power supply on. As long as the fan spins, you should be good to go. I've already gone ahead and tested that, so I'm going to go ahead and put it in the case. For this power supply, I'm going to have the fan facing up. So I'm going to slide it in the side, bring it toward the back, and then I'm going to secure it with 4 screws. The difficult part about having the power supply in here, and a lot of people I think do this, is they put the cables in first and then they actually attach the power supply. I'm not sure all which cables I need yet, so I'm just going to go ahead and plug them in as I need them, starting with the processor cable and the motherboard cable. So the motherboard cable I've already got plugged into the motherboard itself. I'm just going to route it in, and then I'm going to plug in the processor ones and CPU ones, which are these two. It took a little bit, and I have the case stuff plugged into the motherboard. I also have the power supply parts plugged into the motherboard. Now I need to go ahead and put in the solid state drives that I'm using. So these solid state drives, they're the NVMe like M.2, something like that. They plug directly into the motherboard itself. There are 2 slots on this one, so I actually have 2 of those solid state drives, and opted to not have any of the 2.5 inch or 3.5 inch drives in the computer right now. I might add some later, but this just frees up space in the case. So I'm going to go ahead and plug those in. But first, I'm going to show you. So the motherboard itself is in. Power cables to the case are down here. On this one, the case comes with a USB Type 3 or the USB Type C port. This motherboard has USB Type C. However, I can't figure out yet. The header, I don't think is the correct type. I think it's Type 1. The case is Type 2. So I don't know if there's an adapter or something. So for right now, that renders my USB Type C port useless, essentially. Which isn't a big deal to me. I don't even think I have any Type C devices other than my GoPro. But I'm going to go ahead and plug the solid state drives in and then make some progress. So this motherboard has a drive slot right here. I need to add the standoffs to the spots to hold the M2 drive up. So I'm going to go ahead and do that first. The other slot on this one is underneath of this cover. So I'm going to go ahead and take this cover off and put the other one in. Now that I've got the hard drives in and the motherboard in, I'm going to go ahead and put the processor on, and then the graphics card, then the RAM, and try to wrap this up. Now the important part on the motherboard is this socket right here. You have to make sure that the processor that you chose matches the socket on the motherboard. In this case, this is an AM4 socket, and this processor connects to the AM4 socket. So just make sure that you do that research and that it'll all connect together. So first I'm going to lift this part up to unlock it. On the bottom of the processor, you're going to see this little arrow in the corner. This little arrow is going to correspond to one on the board, so just make sure you line it up correctly and put it in. So in this case, the arrow is on this side, so I need to make sure to orient the processor like this. Just be gentle, slide it in, don't try to force it, and then lock it into place and make sure this goes underneath of that part. Now this will not come out. Next is the CPU cooler fan. This fan came with my processor. It's kind of big, but I'm going to have to plug it in, make sure I fit everything in, and then it's got this paste on the bottom that connects to the CPU to help with the thermal. So I'm going to try to connect this. It is kind of difficult with this processor. I built my work computer with this one, so this is going to take a little bit of work, but we'll get it in. You just got to make sure to latch under these latches that are a part of it. Next up in the build is the graphics card. So for this one, I chose the Gigabyte RTX 2070 Super. It's supposed to be really good for gaming, but also for video editing and design. Now this is a little bit on the pricier side. I think this alone was $499, and there was no sale on this. It came with, I think, Call of Duty for free, which is, I think, like a $60 value for what that's worth. But there is another version, the 2060, which is also really good, but at a lower price point. So the money that I saved buying other components on sale, I went ahead and sunk into the graphics card to try and just get better performance. So now I'm gonna go ahead and put that in, and then the RAM, and hopefully wrap this up. It's important to note that on the back side of this, you're gonna have to take off some of these panels. There's screws on the back side of the case, so you'll pop those off to get the graphics card in. And then the graphics card basically replaces these parts. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that first. Now that I have the graphics card in, I need to go ahead and connect the cords from the power supply to here. I'm going to go ahead and use both, and then plug in the RAM. The last part of the computer to go in is the RAM. So I have the G-Skill Ripjaws. This is DDR4 3600 RAM. It is 32 gigabytes of RAM. And on this one, the timing, so if you do research on the RAM timing, this is 16, 19, 19, 39. This was about $135, I think, before tax. So this is actually really good speeds for the price point that it was. When you're installing the RAM, just make sure you consult the motherboard guide, because it will give you a recommendation of which slots to use if you're using 1 stick of RAM, 2 sticks of RAM, etc. So just be sure to check on that. I'm going to go ahead and put this in, close the computer up, and then take it inside, boot it up, and hopefully this all works. The lighting is terrible in my office, but I'm in here. I have the computer hooked up to the power supply. Well, I have it plugged in, have it hooked up to the monitor. So the first step is, will the power supply work? Second step is turn the computer on. and see if it launches into BIOS. And then what I need to do is, I don't have an internal CD drive, so I actually have this external one that we had from the past. So I'm going to try to load Windows 10, activate it, do all that, and try to install it. I'm not going to bore you with that process, but let's see if it boots up. So step one is going back here and turning this switch on. Up. That's a good sign. I'm going to take this panel off. I'll be right back. Okay, so there's no panel right now I can reach my hand in. Going to turn it on. And let's see. That's a good sign. So the RGB is working. Doesn't want to focus. So far that's a pretty good sign. I'm going to try to install Windows 10, get everything running, and see how that goes. So the next time you'll see me, hopefully this will all be working. It's been about a week now since I actually built the computer, put everything together, and started installing my programs. I have been using it for the last week and it's working great. A couple of things that I wanted to go over. I didn't actually end up using the disk drive to install Windows. I used a different method. I'll link a video below where I got the information from, but you basically make an install for Windows on a USB drive. The one thing I did do is accidentally overwrite data on that USB drive, which was my mistake. Make sure you use a blank one or one that you don't care if the stuff gets overwritten. But basically you make a bootable Windows from that USB drive, and that is what you use to install Windows. As far as the activation key, I bought one off of eBay for about, I think, $7 or $8. It's pretty cheap compared to buying a disc from the store. Everything's legitimate, it's all legal, but it helps you save a lot of money on the Windows 10 part of this. But again, I'll link a video below on where I learned that from. The installation process was pretty easy. One thing on my computer is I actually had to turn the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi off on the motherboard and the BIOS to be able to get Windows to install. This is just what happened with this one. It also happened with the work computer with the same motherboard, but you can go back in later and turn it back on. I've been using the computer to model in Fusion 360, do some design in Illustrator, as well as edit this current video, and everything is working great so far. It's about 10 times faster than my old one, which is great. The video doesn't skip anymore like it did in my old one either. So I think this is going to be a very good addition to the workflow and make things more efficient. This video has taken about maybe 2 hours to edit. On the old computer, it probably would have taken 4 or 5 just from waiting for things to load and boot up. So I'm pretty happy. I'm going to actually link all the parts that I use in the description below with the Amazon affiliate links if you'd like to use them. But it will also give you the part numbers of what I used. And I'm going to go ahead and put the prices that I paid next to it, as well as a breakdown of all the pricing that I had. So if you like what you see, like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment below what computer parts that you're using, or if you have questions about what I went through. Again, I'm no expert on this, but I did a lot of research and I can answer some of the general questions that you might have. And check out my Instagram where I share stuff about what I'm doing in the shop, as well as project updates and progress shots. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.